Hi, everyone. Hey, Sydney, can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you and see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so hi, everybody. I appreciate everybody joining tonight. Of course, we all know how busy we all are. And so to give up some time this evening, my goal is very straightforward. My goal is to, well, actually, let me just pause for a second because we have so many, we have so many folks still joining. So um, if everybody doesn't mind just sitting tight for one more minute. Okay, and while I'm just allowing a few more folks to join on, um, just in case you don't have a notepad, pen or pencil, go ahead and grab something right now. I have done this webinar many times for NSHSS families and for just for many different groups, and typically people do take a lot of notes. Um, if it's possible to have both the student and the parent, that's ideal. Of course, if I just present to parents, they always say, "Oh, I wish I had my son or daughter on. Now I have to try to relay all of this information." So, if possible, and then, of course, if it's just a student, essentially the same thing. Try to relay all of this information to mom or dad or whomever. So if it's possible to have both parent and student on, that's great. And certainly, taking notes. And my goal is straightforward, and that is to answer every question that you all have about the SAT, ACT, PSAT, how they relate to college admissions, in as short a time as possible. And so if we can accomplish that in 45 minutes, it's stuff that you can find on the internet. Obviously, we can find anything on the internet, but it would take quite a long time to gather up all the information. I am going to take questions at the end. I will answer most of your questions, and I know I will only because, again, I've done this so many times. So I know what all of the frequently asked questions are, and those are covered in the slides. So of course, feel free to use the question and answer feature. And then I'll be checking that at the end. But we are, of course, going to have everybody muted because we do have quite a few folks on tonight. Alrighty, let's get started. So if you're going to listen to me present for a little bit here tonight, it's nice to know a little bit about me. Grew up right here on Long Island, went to Princeton University, did the Princeton Teacher Preparation Program, which is a cool way to almost have a double major at Princeton. So I graduated with my teaching certification, and I came back to Long Island. My parents spent their whole careers as teachers, and I was teaching fifth grade, and they said, Tom, we have a lot of students here at our high school who are not doing well in the SAT and ACT. Maybe you could help them. And this was back in 1998. So don't do the math on that. It's been a long, many, many years. But I started tutoring students. And what I found immediately was that students were going into these tests with very few strategies, very techniques, tricks. They had no idea how to approach the timing of the exam. A lot of times they did not even know what was on the exam. So they were really taking the test cold, and they were scoring way below their potential. And they were saying things like, "Oh, I'm not a good test taker." And I would say, it's not that you're not a good test taker, it's that you don't have any strategies. So again, it wasn't that they couldn't perform better. It was that they didn't really have the tools. So started tutoring all day, every day. I really enjoyed it. I love that for the entire hour, it was just pure teaching. Working one-on-one with a student is very rewarding and gratifying. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And, from there, the business grew, and we hired more instructors, and we built the web-based program that many, many of you are using. I'll touch on that towards the end. So anyway, so just a little bit about me. And I always like to say, parents and students, I can empathize with everybody. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm kind of pie in the sky, or I don't know what the reality is of what's been going on this last year and a half. My wife and I, we have twins who are heading into 7th grade this year. So we're not that many years behind all of you. This is pre-COVID, taking the Long Island Railroad into Manhattan. So that's my son, Jonathan, and there's my wife, Allison, who's a speech pathologist in the New York City Department of Education, and then our daughter, Julia. Last thing about me is many of us at Method, we take the SAT and ACT over and over again. We stay current on the different trends, how the questions are changing. So at one point, I wrote an article about my experience, and our local newspaper published it, and they titled it "Old Guy Takes the SAT." And so people get a kick out of this article, but I like to share it because it did remind me of the pressure and the anxiety. I was nervous the day I took the test. I was nervous the day my scores came back, and my wife kind of just shook her head at me, and she's like, "Well, what are you nervous about? Your scores don't matter for anything. We have, at the time we had younger kids we were taking care of, but it was a reminder to me of this can be a very stressful process, and of course, then the question is, well, how do you reduce the anxiety? And the answer is even just with a few hours of preparation. So I was less nervous because I knew exactly what to expect. I knew exactly what I was going to be tested on, and that's what we do with every student we work with. So we do a lot of private tutoring. We teach a lot of classes. We have our web-based program, and my goal is to help a student get the highest SAT or ACT score in the shortest amount of time possible, right? Nobody wants to spend their entire junior year or senior year preparing for the SAT or ACT. We want to get the highest score in the least amount of time. So that's what this presentation will focus on. Okay, so if you only remember one thing from this presentation, I want it to be that these tests are predictable. Because they're predictable, they warrant preparation, right? If we didn't know what you were going to be tested on, it wouldn't make sense to prepare. You wouldn't bother. But these are highly predictable tests. And so these are not IQ tests. These are tests that you can make an enormous difference on. So again, if you only remember one thing from tonight, it is you can improve your SAT and ACT score tremendously, and there are efficient ways to do so. So I want to make sure everyone is crystal clear on our goal tonight. Our goal is to learn how to achieve higher scores and then use higher SAT and ACT scores to get accepted to more colleges, have more options and choices. Nobody wants to apply to 10 colleges and only get accepted to 2 or 3 just because of a low test score. Not only that, we want to use higher scores to earn more in academic merit aid. So most of you are probably aware, many schools, one of the criteria for how they determine academic merit aid is test scores. And so, it's not always that it's like a full ride versus no money. A lot of times it's, hey, if you score a little higher on the SAT or ACT, you'll have a few $1,000s more in academic merit aid, or you can qualify for the honors program. So those are very common things that happen. And so our goal tonight, and it's a very realistic goal, is to use scores to have more options and to earn more in academic scholarship and merit aid. So this is interesting, and I want everybody, I'm not going to use the poll feature, but I want everybody to put just an answer in their head. You might just be a guess. If a student gets just one more question correct on the SAT, how many points does his or her score often go up? I'll give you just a second to think about that. And this might be, if you only remember 2 things about tonight's presentation, this maybe should be the second one. The answer is each additional question is 10 more points on your score. So think about that for a second. If you get 5 more grammar questions, 5 more math questions, and 5 more reading questions, that's a 150-point improvement on your score. That is a massive improvement. And I'm very passionate that every single student can do that. And when I share it like that, I've seen many, many students that it does change their mindset. it makes them more motivated. It makes them more confident. It makes them more optimistic because in their heart, they know they can learn 5 grammar tricks, 5 reading tricks, and 5 math tricks. So that should be everybody's first goal. And of course, some students will increase their scores even more than that, but each question is 10 more points. And that's a powerful motivator that you can make a difference. Now, the ACT, the news is just as good. Each additional question that you answer correctly on the ACT could be a 1-point improvement on that part of your ACT or that sub-score. So if you get 4 more ACT English, 4 more math, 4 more reading, 4 more science, that could be a 4-point improvement in your SAT or in your ACT score, which again is a very significant improvement. Okay, so let's just run through some data points, just get some facts on the table. The national average on the ACTs, the ACT is scored out of 36, right? The maximum score is a 36. The national average is a 21. That often surprises people. They thought the national average was much higher. So when people ask what's a good score, anything above a 21 is above average. Now, so if you score a 26 or a 27, that's way above average. I partly share that because I've worked with so many families, so many students over the year, and they were so they felt like they needed to get a 30. And hey, a 30 is an achievable goal for a lot of students, a 30 and above. But if you score a 28 or a 29, that's still an excellent score. So again, I want people to understand what the fact is as far as the national average. For the SAT, maximum score, of course, is a 1600. The national average is around a 1070. So anything above a 1070 is above average. 1200 is a benchmark score. Once you hit a 1200, that's way above average. That will get you accepted to a lot of schools. That will often get you academic merit aid. And then, of course, scoring above a 1400 is another benchmark, and that puts you in a very high percentile. So just some thoughts there around national averages, et cetera. Okay, so let's kind of, again, I want to cut to the chase as much as possible. What would I do if I had a 12th grader this year instead of 2 7th graders? Or what would I do if I was a 12th grader this year? So my plan would be pretty straightforward. If I was a 12th grader right now, if I had a 12th grader, I would be helping or I'd be preparing for the September ACT and the October SAT. Now, of course, it's somewhat dependent on how many tests you've taken so far, whether you've scored much higher on one test over the other. I will say that most students score about the same on the SAT and ACT. About 70% of students score about the same. 30% of students score higher on one test over the other. But it's very hard to predict which test you're going to score better on. So like my son and my daughter, they're going to be taking each test once. I'm not going to try to predict which test they're going to be better on. I'm going to have them take each test once. And then, of course, we can just easily compare online, doing an online search. We can compare their scores. And if they scored higher on one test over the other, I would have them take that test the second time. But again, most students are going to score about the same. So all things being equal, if you're a 12th grader and you haven't taken the SAT or ACT before, or maybe you've only taken the SAT once or ACT once, I would be preparing because there's no maximum number of times. I don't want students to have to take the test many, many times, but it's never, it's never like it's your last chance. I never want students to think it's now or never because that puts added pressure on. And then I wouldn't necessarily take both 2 SATs and 2 ACTs this fall. To me, that's overkill. I would take maybe one of each, and then if I wanted to score a little higher and needed to score higher for a scholarship or whatever, then I would take a second ACT or second SAT. Now, before we go any further, I want to address this notion of test optional, which of course is something that everyone has been talking about now for a year and a half. So many schools are test optional, which means you don't have to submit test scores as part of your application. There's another term called test blind. That means the college will not look at scores, even if you send them. And most schools are not test blind. Most schools are test optional, where they're saying you don't have to submit scores. Of course, there's a lot more to the story. I've spoken with many college admissions officers. I've spoken with many private college counselors and counselors in high schools. And it's very difficult to get a straight answer from anybody. But one thing that I've heard is that if you're in a part of the country where you had multiple opportunities to take the SAT or ACT, they'd really like to see a test score, most colleges. If you're in a part of the country where the test was just canceled over and over and over again, then it's sort of less important or more optional. But then there are all sorts of caveats, meaning oftentimes a college will say it's test optional to apply for admissions, but if you want to apply for a particular program, then test scores are required. Or if you want to apply for certain scholarships, test scores are required. And so again, I think it's pretty unfair to families that it's hard to kind of navigate, and of course it's case by case. Each school is different. So if it was my son or my daughter, if it was me, I would be taking the SAT or ACT. I'd be preparing for it. I guess you can think of it as better be safe than sorry, or to be on the safe side. I want to have every advantage possible. And certainly a very high test score, it's hard to see. That's clearly not going to hurt you. And in many cases could help. So it is a tough year to navigate, but the simple advice is that you want to take the SAT or ACT, or you want to provide colleges with a score. And of course, you want that score to be as high as possible. So I hope that clarifies, at least on some level. May have some questions at the end. But yeah, I wanted to address that sooner rather than later. So one thing I've always found to be helpful to share are upcoming ACT test dates. So there is an ACT on September 11th. There is an ACT on October 23rd. The reason I put in-school test is increasingly high schools are giving an in-school ACT or SAT. Only students from that school are able to take the test. Sometimes it's given on sort of a custom day. So that's just something to look into and see if your high school is going to be doing an in-school SAT or an in-school ACT. So those are a couple upcoming ACT test dates. There's also an ACT in December, another one in February. So nice thing is the ACT, it's given 7 times a year. Those are national test dates in addition to the in-school tests or the special school testing dates. And also the statewide. So many states give the ACT on a particular day. And so every student in that state has the opportunity to take the test on that day. As far as upcoming SAT dates, you can see here, August 23rd, October 2nd, November 6th, and then also possibly an in-school test option. Okay, so what would I do if I had an 11th grader this year, or if I was an 11th grader? So this is very important information. So maybe take a screenshot of this slide. There are certain SATs and ACTs where the College Board or the ACT, they allow you to pay an extra $20 and then they send the entire test back to you, or I should say they show you your test results online where you can see every question you answered correct, incorrect, and you can learn from your mistakes. What's almost tragic to me is for the last 22 years, and I speak to probably 50 families a week. So I speak to quite a few families a week, and it's rare that a family understands what this is. So when you register for the SAT or ACT, if you're taking one of the test dates on this slide, you want to look for the box that says, for the SAT, I want the question and answer service. For the ACT, I want the TIR service, which stands for Test Information Release. And so one way I like to explain it is, imagine taking a 4-hour exam, getting a score you're not completely satisfied with, having no one tells you what you did wrong, and then somebody says, hey, go take that test again. Yeah, that's absurd. Why would I take a test again when I don't even know what I did wrong the last time, right? So the good news is there's a better way. And again, for my son and my daughter, these are the test dates that we're going to be focusing on. I don't want my son or my daughter to take a 4-hour exam and then we're never going to be able to see what they answered incorrectly, and we have no way to learn from the mistake. So, so for the SAT, it's March, May, and October. For the ACT, it's December, April, and June. So that kind of suggests a simple timeline. So, and again, this might be something you want to jot down. a very straightforward timeline that makes sense for a lot of students is junior year, October, PSAT, December, ACT, and March, SAT. And people say, wow, waiting till March to take the SAT, that sounds awfully late. The reality is students score higher on the SAT in the spring on average because they have the benefit of all those additional months of 11th grade. Not only will you learn some higher level math strategies, some ways to maybe answer some of the most difficult math questions more efficiently, but of course, you're going to build your vocabulary. You're going to build your reading comprehension skills. Most students on this call tonight, and I know myself, I took a very AP heavy course schedule in my 11th grade year. So I was doing a tremendous amount of reading. So my reading comprehension skills were improving throughout the year. So for all of those reasons, a student is likely to score higher on the SAT in the spring than in the fall. Also, I want the benefit of the question and answer service. So we can easily prepare a student to take the SAT in November or December of their junior year. But in some respects, I wonder if there's really an advantage to that when you're likely going to score higher in March. I absolutely think every 11th grader should take the PSAT in October. The PSAT was designed for junior year. So even though I took the PSAT in my 10th grade year, I know many of you did, and that's fine, but it's still a test for 11th graders. And that's why in October is really the time to take the PSAT rather than the official SAT. Now, of course, that's a straightforward timeline, but for many different reasons, a student may not want to follow that timeline. But they might be more busy in the winter or more busy in the spring or more busy in the fall. So they'll adjust the timeline to suit their needs. And of course, many students can score well in the fall of their junior year. So, for some students, maybe it makes sense to take the test sooner. But anyway, I like to give that advice because it's good advice for a large percentage of 11th graders. And then, of course, as far as a second SAT, the May exam is a great time to take the SAT a second time. We have the benefit of the question and answer service. Yes, it's a downside that the May SAT is around the time of APs, but the upside is all of that effort and studying you're going to be putting in for the AP exams, of course, is going to help you tremendously on the SAT. Again, as far as reading comprehension or math skills, if you're studying for an AP math exam, something like that. As far as a second time to take the ACT, either April or June would be a smart time. You can order the TIR service again so you can see what you're getting wrong. But when people ask me about the December ACT, I tell people, like, what I'm going to tell my son and my daughter is, you're not taking the December ACT because it's ultimately going to be your best score. You're taking the December ACT so we can learn from your mistakes, so we can use it as a stepping stone, right? So if you can score a 26 or 27 on the December ACT, we can look over your mistakes, we can review them, talk about the underlying strategies. Now you're setting yourself up to score 30 and above on your second and then hopefully final ACT. Okay, I know I spent a lot of time on this slide. It's a very important slide, but now we can move on. So if you get a question wrong on the SAT or ACT, you lose how many points? Many of you know this. The answer is 0, right? You have nothing to lose. There is no reason to leave a question blank on either the SAT or the ACT. Answer every question. And people say to me, like, will that really make a difference? If I have no idea, should I even bother? And the answer is absolutely. In many respects, in many cases, there are only 4 choices, right? So you have a 1 in 4 chance. So there's no reason to leave a question blank or omit a question. Answer every question. You do not lose any points. And we'll kind of do a lightning round here with some of these next couple of slides. So how many questions are there on the 45-minute ACT English section? Give everybody a second just to put a guess in their head. And often when I ask this question, people say 45, 50, 60. The answer is actually 75 questions. And when I share that, I often there's kind of a shock that, wow, the ACT is asking me to answer 75 questions, only 45 minutes. You do the math on that, that's only about 35 seconds per question. And so The reality is that it's not impossible to finish 75 questions in 45 minutes. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. And so there's a couple of things that are really important to share about this data point or fact. One is, let's say you're working as fast as possible. And let's say in 44 minutes, you get through 65 questions. At that moment, the proctor says 1 minute left. That's when you have to go ahead and bubble in an answer for those last 10 questions. Because once the proctor says, time's up, pencils down, you are not allowed to go back and fill in any answers. And on the next section, you're not allowed to go back to the previous section. So, a student who gets through 65 questions in 44 minutes, they're working pretty fast. When you hear 1 minute left, make sure you bubble in an answer for all of the rest, rather than just spending the last minute on the 2 or 3 questions. The other thing is, how can you answer 75 questions in 45 minutes? Well, it's because this is an extremely repetitive section. They essentially test you on the same 11 grammar rules over and over again. So if you memorize and study and practice those 11 rules, you can fly through the questions. Again, very simple, very straightforward way to have a dramatic increase on your score by just knowing those grammar rules that they're guaranteed to test you on. And I'm such an SAT, ACT sort of dork, nerd, I can't help myself. We're going to go over one of those rules right now. So one phrase for this example is red flag words. So I'm going to post a sentence here on the screen, and your job is to try to figure out the error. Take a few seconds, read the sentence, try to figure out the error. Okay, so just have an answer in your head, give you a few more seconds, even if it's just a complete guess. It's more fun to have a guess before I reveal the answer. So the error in this sentence, would it be the congressional panel issued their findings? No, it would be the congressional panel issued its findings. So the rule here is subject pronoun agreement. The subject is a panel. That's a singular subject. It's just one panel. So the pronoun has to be singular, its. Now, this is considered a trick question. And the SAT and ACT ask questions like this all the time. They know for a fact they're going to fool thousands of people every time. Because people say, hey, wait a second, a panel is a group of people. There are multiple people on the panel. And of course, that's true, but it's still a singular subject, one panel. So there is not correct, it's its. So this is a great example. Actually, what kind of blows me away is there will be 3 or 4 subject pronoun agreement questions on every single SAT or ACT. So just by knowing one additional thing, you're getting 3 or 4 more questions correct for the price of 1. And this to me is a great example of how every student can improve their scores, can learn what we know you're going to be tested on. Okay, so what are some of the main differences between the SAT and ACT? Well, here's an important one you might want to jot down. 50% of your SAT score comes down to your math ability, the math sections. Only 25% of your ACT score comes down to your math ability. So think about that. That's a massive difference. If you're stronger in math than you are in verbal, in English, you may feel more comfortable. You may score higher on the SAT because you know that half of your score is going to come down to the math sections. On the other hand, if you're stronger in English than you are in math, you may feel more comfortable with the ACT. And in fact, matter of fact, I want you to go into the ACT with a chip on your shoulder. And here's why. On the ACT, 3/4 of your score essentially comes down to your reading comprehension ability. So you have the ACT English section, which is basically the grammar section. That's what we just talked about. You can memorize those grammar rules. If you're strong in English, you'll do very well in that section. Then you have the ACT reading section. All of the questions are in the passages. So now you have to move quickly and you have to practice going back to the passage and finding the answers in a speedy fashion, but all of the answers are there. So if you're a strong English student, a strong reader, you can do very well in that section, find the answers to the questions. And then you have the ACT science section. which is really not a science section. It's really a reading comprehension section. They give you a chart, a graph, a table, a couple of paragraphs. They ask you to pull information off of what they're giving you. So again, it's not really a science section as much as it a reading comprehension. When students understand that, again, if you're a strong English student, you can go into the ACT with a chip on your shoulder, knowing you can do very well on those 3 sections. Even the math section, a lot of times students say it wasn't the actual math, it was the wording of the question. So again, a strong reader will have an easier time with that. Okay, I guess just one other thing here as far as difference, you get less time per question on the ACT. So both tests are difficult to finish in time, but the ACT is even more difficult to finish in time because you get less time per question. Now, good news is the questions are straightforward, so you don't need as much time on the ACT, but you have to move very quickly on both exams, but especially the ACT. Okay, and this we just went over. On which test do you have more time per question? Of course, that's the SAT. More time per question on the SAT, which is appropriate because sometimes the questions tend to be a little bit more involved on average. So how many sections on the SAT, ACT? We've already covered that. 4 sections on each. For the SAT, 2 are math and 1 is reading, 1 is grammar. On the ACT, you have 1 math, 1 reading, essentially 1 grammar, which they call English, and then you have the science section. As far as the optional essay, there is no more essay on the SAT. On the ACT, it's an optional section. Even before they took the SAT essay away, my advice is don't bother with the ACT essay. Most colleges aren't even going to look at it, so it's probably not worth your time. The ACT science section test students on science knowledge, that's false. That we covered that it's really a reading comprehension section. How many times can you take the SAT, ACT, or how many times should you? So the ideal number of times, I would like to see a student take between the SAT and ACT a total of 3 times. And again, what I mean by that is 1 SAT, 1 ACT, and then whichever test you scored higher on or felt more comfortable on, take that test a second time. These are long, grueling exams. The less times that a student has to take the exam, the better. Of course, that's motivation to work a bit harder, so you don't have to sit for the test 5 or 6 times. Now, as far as how many times can a student take these exams, the nice thing is as many times as need be. I've had many students who were told by a college, if you score a little bit higher on the SAT or ACT, you'll get an extra $4,000 or $5,000 a year. Well, now you're in a great position because you have nothing to lose. You can take the test again. As a matter of fact, you can take as many times as you need to get those additional points to earn that substantial amount of money. Can you mix and match your best scores? Yes, that's called super scoring. So if you take the SAT twice, you get a higher math score the first time and a higher reading score the second time. You can mix and match those 2 scores. That's a practice that's been around forever. So that's super scoring. And it's also something you can do on the ACT. That's more of a newer phenomenon, but the ACT does allow super scoring, or I should say colleges do accept ACT super scores. You can mix and match your best scores. This is what the ACT score report looks like. You can see the large circle there on the left. That's your composite ACT score. And then you have the 4 sub-scores. And the way you get the composite score is just by taking an average of these 4, right? So add them up, divide by 4. The writing section, separate from the English, right? The English is that's one of the sections that is part of your main score. Your writing score is a separate score. And again, most colleges don't even really focus on it. So this one is really not important. Okay, how much time should I put in each week to prepare for the test? So again, this is kind of like, okay, Tom, you've shared a lot of information. Bottom line, how much time should I put in? And the answer is 2.5 hours per week. So I'm very realistic. I'm not asking students to move mountains. I'm not saying put in 10 hours a week. If you put in 2.5 hours a week in the 10 weeks leading up to the test, you will make an enormous difference on your score. Now, of course, if you put in a little bit more time each week, you're likely going to score even higher. If you're studying a little sooner, you're going to score higher. But I want to be realistic because I want every student out there to, the shame is a lot of kids, they put in very little time, or, just an hour a week or something like that. And then they're going to end up scoring below their potential. So 2.5 hours a week is very realistic, very reasonable. If you follow that plan, you can score very well. So, kind of a final, not a final question, but just a really, one of the most common questions I get, a frequently asked question is, all right, Tom, so you've shared all this information, but what's a smart next step? How can I increase my SAT score 150 points? How can I increase my ACT score 3 points? Again, in the most efficient way possible. So one option is we offer what we call advantage classes. They just mean they're comprehensive classes. So our standard class is 18 hours of live instruction. Of course, it's with a live instructor. Students can chat back and forth, ask questions of the instructor. All of the classes are recorded. So inevitably, a student has to miss a class or two because of a conflict. That's not a huge deal because you can go back and watch the recording on demand. And these classes also include access to our web-based platform, Methodize, which is normally a $250 purchase, but that is included in the price of the class. So these advantage classes are a great deal from a financial perspective. And any student who takes one of these classes will learn every trick, every strategy, every technique. So just to share with you all, a couple of, just to give everyone a sense of a couple of the options. So we have an SAT Advantage course that's starting on August 30th. So in just a couple of days, it's 8 to 10 Eastern. Just check real quick. I'm almost positive that's a Monday, Wednesday. Let me just look at my calendar here. Yeah, so it's a Monday, Wednesday. The class starts this coming Monday. And you can see the price point is very reasonable, $499. As a matter of fact, for folks who are on tonight, attendees, we are offering a special discount code that's good tonight and tomorrow, and that's $100 off. So when people say to me, hey, Tom, what do you recommend for any, junior or senior, even a sophomore that's going to be taking the PSAT, this is a really intelligent first step, taking a class like this, because you're going to learn every trick, strategy, and technique. And it's also, again, from a value perspective, from a financial perspective, it's a really great deal, especially if you take advantage of the coupon code. So, and I'll put the link to these classes in the chat in a second, but just jot down, AUG 25. So just the date today, when you put that code in, instead of the class being $499, you'll get the class for $399. So I had shared with you this first class that starts on Monday. And then I just wanted to share a second option. The reality is we have classes like this starting all of the time because the biggest challenge is everyone's so busy. So for some students, a weeknight is better. But for a lot of students, a Sunday night or a Sunday happens to be the best day, right? The weeks are busy and Sunday's the only day where they have time. So the reason I posted this class, it started last Sunday, but it's a 5 to 8. And of course, you can go back and watch the recording of last Sunday's class. So for a lot of students, this is the best option. This is the option that's most convenient for them. We do offer many options though. And again, in a second, I'll post that in the chat. If you want to just take a quick picture of this, this is our contact information. Of course, if you have a question, if you something you'd like me to elaborate on, you can give us a call. You can send me an email. So now I want to take some time to go through the question and answers here. And I'm going to try to go through and sort of rapid fire so I can answer as many questions as possible. Yeah. A great question here. My daughter has severe test anxiety. Can this be overcome, or just look for test optional colleges, which is preferred? So you want to have every option at your disposal. The answer is test anxiety absolutely can be overcome. And so what I always say to people is, it's not like test anxiety is going to go from, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's going to go from a 10 to a 2. That's probably not realistic. but you can certainly lower your test anxiety significantly by being more prepared. So the more I started to realize the SAT is literally testing me, the ACT is on the same stuff over and over, I started to feel a little bit more confident, more comfortable. You can almost you can almost feel like I always knew, like, okay, question 8 on the math section was going to be a percent question. It got to that point where it was so predictable. And so when something is predictable, when you know exactly what you're dealing with, you're going to have less anxiety. We humans tend to have more anxiety when we feel unprepared, underprepared, or when we feel like we have no control over the situation. In this sense, we can have a lot of control because we can do enough practice questions where we know exactly what to expect. So great question. And take the SAT. If I'm planning to take the SAT in November, hoping for a 100 score increase between a 1450 and a 1420, excuse me, a 1520, how much should I practice each day? Yeah, that's a great question. I do believe if you put in 2.5, 3 hours a week between now and November, you can improve your score 100 points. So again, that's 10 more questions. Now, you might be somebody who would benefit most from a private tutor, because private tutoring, of course, it's the most efficient. And what I mean by that is, in 1 hour with a private tutor, we always tell people, if you're going to use us for private tutoring, then have some specific questions. So do a practice section, check your answers, circle the ones that you answered incorrectly, and then you say to the tutor, hey, questions 9, 13, 17, and 20, those are the ones I need to go over. And when we tutor somebody privately, of course, we don't just explain that question, we explain the underlying strategies behind that question, right? So we say, if you ever see a question like this, this is how you're going to handle it every time. So good question there. What is a quality of a student that is essential for success for these standardized tests? Or how can they practice it to become better as a student? You know, I always say that the SAT and the ACT, it's almost like a foreign language, meaning you can be very strong in math, but if you've never practiced SAT questions, they can trip you up. They're typically worded in a different way than they're worded on a, say, a school test. So the answer is, and I know this sounds so obvious, so cliche, but it's just practice and repetition. So there's only one book that you should ever buy, and that's the College Board book. And it's a blue cover, and it says the official SAT study guide. And it's got like 10 full practice exams. And you may not get through that entire book, but the more of that book you get through, that is the most, when you ask what is a quality that is essential for success, that's the most important quality, is familiarity with the test questions. You know, when people, I always say the SAT and ACT, they're not IQ tests. They're tests of how many SAT and ACT questions you've practiced. You practice enough of them, you start to get very good at them. So good question there. Yeah, this is a great question. What SAT score would warrant not submitting it and opting for test optional colleges? And I'm getting this question now on essentially a daily basis from parents. So like, just to give an example, a parent said, my son is going to apply to Syracuse. He scored a 1250. Is he better off submitting that, or is he better off just not submitting a score? So again, no one's going to give you a straight answer. I advise that parent to reach out to Syracuse. I would just call the Syracuse. So the smartest thing you do is call a couple of admissions offices and ask them, hey, this is the score that we earned. Is this a score that's going to help our chances or hurt our chances? And you may not get a straight answer every time, but that's the best way to answer the question, because obviously it's impossible for me to say. It depends on the college. It depends on the score. Okay. Yeah, it's another great question. I think that's Brett. And it's a very similar question, but you know, would you suggest submitting an average or slightly below average SAT score to a test optional school versus no score at all? What's the student's, what if the student's GPA is well above average? I mean, I'll give you the pro and the con. Of course, the con is if you have a very high GPA and you don't submit a score, maybe some of the colleges are going to assume that you did not do well. If you, you know, if you submit a score that's average or slightly below average, I think one thing is at least it shows the college that you took the test in a very difficult year, right? You didn't, just kind of take the easy way out. You sat for the test. So it's a great question. And again, I can't give a definitive answer because it's really going to be school dependent. Yeah, great question, Alexandra. For the PSAT, should I get a review book and practice? So the answer is yes. You might as well go ahead and get that College Board book, the official SAT study guide. The good news is the PSAT and the SAT, they test you on the exact same material. The questions are worded the exact same way. So, the good news is any time you put in preparing for the PSAT is less time you'll have to put in for the SAT, right? So it's not like you're wasting your time. And by the way, I used to tell students, don't bother preparing for the PSAT, right? It seems silly. Why am I going to prepare for a practice exam? But here's what I started to notice. Students would not prepare for the PSAT. They would score way below their potential, and then they would get discouraged and demoralized. And they would say things like, I'm not a good test taker. And I would say to them, that's ridiculous. It's not that you're not a good test taker. You did not prepare. But human nature is such, especially teenagers. So here's what I say now. The same student that would have scored, let's just say, an 1100 if they took the PSAT cold, that same exact student, they just put in a few hours preparing for the PSAT, might score a 1200. And all of a sudden, that student, again, has a completely different outlook on the test. Now their goal is to score a 1350. Right, to go up 150 points. Whereas if they had scored an 1100, they would have been demoralized. Maybe they would have set their sights on a lower goal. So great question there. What is the grade when we take the SAT and ACT? 11th grade. I do not believe that a 10th grader should bother taking the official SAT or ACT. Of course, you could take the PSAT, but 11th and 12th grades, those are the grades when you take the SAT and ACT. I'm a senior. I couldn't register for the SAT this year. It showed, what should I do? Yeah, that's frustrating. I know many people have had issues with the College Board website. Their customer service is not always great. If I was you, I would keep trying. I might ask my counselor at my high school to get involved, to help me. I would try reaching out to the College Board via email, via chat, via phone call, because it is important. You don't want to just kind of throw up your hands and say, well, I'm not going to bother. It may hurt your chances of admissions or of academic merit aid. Yeah, good question here. Are there any national PSAT testing dates? Yes. So the PSAT, the College Board offers high schools a couple of options on when to take the PSAT. Now, they're always in October. Typically, one is during the week and one is on the weekend. So anyway, I don't have the exact dates, but typically middle of October. Now, of course, with COVID and even without COVID, they've had some more flexibility. There's been a spring PSAT test date. So best thing to do is just reach out to the counseling office at your school. Okay. Yes. Good question. Is the service available for the PSAT? Yes. Every student who takes the PSAT will automatically get a full breakdown of their scores. They can see questions correct, incorrect. So yes, that's automatic. You don't even have to pay additional, or you don't have to check a box. That's just something that automatically happens. Good question here. Does the ACT test other topics different from the SAT? The answer is not really. I'd rather focus on the fact that these two tests are very similar. They test students on essentially the same grammar rules, reading comprehension strategies are the same, and much of the math is the same. Yeah, there are slight differences in some of the content, but for the most part, very similar tests content-wise. Yeah, good question here. Is there any reason to take the PSAT twice? So I took the PSAT twice. 10th grade PSAT, I don't think it hurt me. I don't think it helped me. So biggest thing is if you're only going to take the PSAT once, take it in 11th grade. But if your school offers the option to take it as a 10th grader as well, it can't hurt. It's just a way to get your feet wet, get familiar with the test questions. So question here from a homeschool parent. My son scored in the 71st percentile, both SAT and ACT first time with no test prep. Wanted to get a baseline. Of course, like to up the scores to get some scholarships, but how much will the scores jump up with test prep? Yeah, great question. And again, it's a very important point, which I'm glad it's come up again, that it is very likely that your son will earn additional academic merit aid. I mean, there have been many students who have gone up 200, 300 and more points on the SAT. There have been students who've gone up 6, 7 points on the ACT. Now, of course, you can have a higher score increase when you're starting with a lower baseline. A student who's already in the 71st percentile, is already scoring, way above average. But certainly to score 150 points higher is realistic. 3 points higher on the ACT is realistic. Yeah, I think that's Kayla. Good question, Kayla. Given the timeline that you just laid out for the 11th grade, when is the best time to take your training? So it really varies based on student, right? So like for a lot of students, now is the best time to take the training because then you're going to score much higher on the PSAT, right? So PSAT is coming up in, basically a month and a half. So now is the perfect time to do some training. Also, a lot of students like to do their test prep or get that test prep started now because they know that as soon as the middle of fall is here, they're going to be incredibly busy. Here in the Northeast, school hasn't even started yet. So now is a good time to get some test prep under the belt. And of course, the test prep that you do now is going to help you in your high school courses, right? Because you're building your reading comprehension skills, you're building your grammar skills and your math skills. So now is a good time for other students. If you're in the middle of a sport season, maybe it's your primary sport, or if you're in the middle of a play rehearsal, then of course now is not the best time. And maybe you take one of our classes in September or October, or even November. So you guys get it. It comes down to your personal schedule. But the one thing I don't like to see is, of course, it's human nature. We all procrastinate. We kind of put it off to the last minute. So that's what you want to avoid, because you'll probably be busier this school year than you anticipate. Certainly, a lot of students will be busier than they were last year. Yeah, good question, Sophia. So say you bubble in questions, you've marked all the questions, possible answer. How do you lose points? So you lose points. Well, you're just scored on how many you have correct, right? So any missed question, you're not going to get the points for that question. Yeah, good question here. And essentially the question is, do college admissions offices, do they kind of penalize you if you take the SAT more than twice? This has been a myth, a rumor, a misconception for years. The answer is no. College admissions offices, they're not looking, to penalize a student. They're really just going to look at your best score, right? And remember that in this day and age, your application is just going into a formula, an algorithm. It's not like there's a stack of papers anywhere. So no, they're not going to, it's not going to hurt you to take the SAT or ACT more than twice. Yeah. Question here is, what is the intention behind trick questions? Yeah, and I know I used that phrase earlier. It's not so much that the SAT or ACT is trying to trick students. It's more that they're testing you on certain knowledge, and they know if they ask a question a certain way, they're going to fool students who don't have a strong grasp of that concept. Fortunately, with even just a few hours of practice, you can learn to avoid a lot of those traps because you have a better grasp of that underlying concept. Yeah, the question here is, would it be of benefit to take speed reading courses? And So, I mean, there's probably some benefit to that for some students. I mean, look, you all have heard the advice a million times. The more you read and the more you read for comprehension, the better you're going to do. So, I mean, speed reading for me, no, what I would do more is just practice reading SAT and ACT passages and reading them quickly. You don't have to understand every word. You don't have to understand every sentence. You're really looking for the main idea, because a lot of the questions on the SAT and ACT come down to the main idea, not a very specific detail. And often you can eliminate the wrong answers because they're not really related to the main idea. Yeah, I have an SAT review book. Should I try reading all of it first and then quiz myself? No, because this person is saying in the past I've gotten overwhelmed by the size of the book. Yeah, I would not try to read the entire book. What I would do is I would maybe read a page or two, but then I would start working on the practice questions. Right, I would quiz myself 10 or 15 questions. Now, I haven't really had a chance to share, and we're up on time here, but if you go to our website, Method Learning, we have our self-paced web-based program Methodize, where you can watch video lessons, listen to audio explanations, and work on practice questions. And so it's a very interactive tool. So yeah, rather than sitting down and trying to read 300 pages of review material, I don't think that's effective. It's more watching some of the video lessons on our website, listening to the audio lessons, and then practicing the questions on our program or in the book. And then, of course, if you get a question wrong, the nice thing about Methodize, our program, is you get a video explanation, an audio explanation, and a written explanation, so you can quickly understand, how to answer a question like that correct in the future. Oh, yeah, sure. So question is just about the email address. So there's my email. Would love to get questions, emails from people, and I can either answer those myself, or I can forward that to one of my colleagues who can answer the question most effectively. Oh yeah, sure. Do I think I can show the SAT Advantage slide again? Let me try to do something quickly here. Let me just see if I can pull up. I'd like to share I'd like to share the URL for all of our Advantage classes, because then you all can pick the class that's most convenient for your schedule. Okay. All right, let me see. I'm just going to, let me just put this, I'm going to type the answer just right here. I know this is a question, everybody, about, and Sydney, if you wouldn't mind, just maybe putting that URL in the most appropriate spot. But, and by the way, everyone, you will be getting an email with the recording of this webinar and also with information to sign up for our classes. Of course, you can just go to methodlearning.com. Very, very simple. And our website is very easy to navigate. But let me just go, sorry, let me just go back to that question, because I hit an answer. Okay, I can't find it. No big deal. So question about the Khan Academy.
You can put that URL in the chat if you want. That way everyone can see it.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. Do that right now. The question was about the Khan Academy, everybody, and how our program compares. And obviously, the question is about our self-paced, web-based program, Methodize. The Khan Academy doesn't have any live instruction or private tutoring, but as far as, so I use the Khan Academy every single day with my son and my daughter. It's an amazing tool. The issue with their SAT prep, or there's a couple of issues. One is, well, first of all, there's no ACT prep, right? So you have to go to two different places. But The videos that play on Khan Academy's SAT prep, they often don't explain the question that you just had trouble on. The video is in that general realm. So students find that very frustrating. They get a question wrong, they expect the video to explain that question, and the video doesn't. It's just in that general area. So that's one of the reasons why students have found our program Methodized to be a more effective tool. So I think next question here, and we'll only have time for a couple more, everybody, and I apologize if I wasn't able to answer your question. Go ahead and send me an email, and I'll answer it as soon as I can. But do you have tips for EL students, so English language learners? Really the preparation is the same as practice and repetition. I know it's going to be more challenging in some respects, but good question there. Can colleges see how many times you take the SAT? I mean, they can request, excuse me, to see all your test scores, but again, they're overwhelmed. They're not looking to do detective work to dig through all your scores. They're just going to go based on your best scores. Just scrolling through a few, because there are a few questions here that are similar to questions we already answered. Yeah, how many of each test do juniors usually take? I would say one of each test, and then a second test in your junior year. So and hopefully by the end of your junior year, you're done with the SAT ACT prep process. The goal is to not have to take the test again in your senior year. Yeah, how do you sign up for the SAT or ACT? Good question. Good news is, like anything these days, you can just Google it. How do I register for the SAT? You just go to collegeboard.com or collegeboard.org, same thing. ACT, you just go to actstudent.org. Yeah, good question. My daughter is a sophomore in advanced placement. Is it better for her to take the test this year or wait? Yeah, better to wait. Just take the PSAT this year. She could probably score well on the SAT or ACT this year, but there's no point. Might as well wait till junior year when you're going to score even higher. Yeah, good question, Nathan. If you take the SAT the second time, score lower, do you keep your previous score? Yes, you'll still be able to keep your previous score. That's the one that colleges are going to go based on. Score, I may not feel comfortable. Yeah, so Nicholas asks, I'm registered to take the October 2nd SAT this fall, but I wanted to do early action for some of the universities that I'm interested in. Depending on my score, I may not feel comfortable with doing early action unless I take the SAT again. What do you recommend? Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question, right, Nicholas? And I think that it's smart to take the October 2nd SAT. I think there's a ton you can do between now and then to increase your chances of scoring very well. I think that, look, it's a tough call for me because it comes down to, the school that you're interested in and a lot of different factors. So that might be something better for you to give us a call, and we can kind of go through some of the strategy, maybe even based on how you score on October 2nd. Good question. Yeah, good question here. So if I'm retaking the SAT this weekend, should I take your SAT power classes while reviewing the questions I got wrong with the question answer service? So we offer power classes, and that just means these are last minute review classes the week leading up to the test. So the answer is yes, you should take our power classes. The gentleman who teaches these classes is amazing. He's an amazing instructor. Let me post these because not sure how many people are on tonight who are taking the SAT on Saturday. And the power class, it's essentially starting right now, or started a couple of minutes ago. So let me put this URL in the chat here. So our power classes, what students like about these, one night per subject. And so 2 hours each night. So like tonight from 8 to 10, we're doing an SAT math power class. And tomorrow night, the same thing. So I just put that URL in the chat. And that, for anybody taking the SAT this weekend, that would be a good idea to take our power classes. Yeah, if you finished the College Board book and you finished the Big Red ACT book, yes, there are places to go online. You'll Google additional SAT, ACT tests, but that also might be a reason to use my methodized program, because in the methodized program, we have over 1,400 additional questions, right? So there's just going to be a lot of new material, different from what you've seen if you've done those books already. Yeah, and just to be on the safe side, please repeat the name of the book with the practice test. So it's the official SAT study guide. If you just Google official SAT prep book, College Board, it'll come right up. And then for the ACT, it's the real ACT study guide. And it's a large book with a red cover. Yeah, good question. Yes. Will there be another weekend series? So yes. So like we have the weekend advantage class that started last weekend. We have many more weekend advantage classes. And the $100 discount code is valid for any class coming up. So even if the class doesn't start for 3 months, you can still use the AUG 25 coupon code for that class. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Obviously, thank you all for taking so much time tonight. I know we covered a ton of material. I know I didn't get to every question, but I hope everybody got something out of the presentation tonight. Hopefully I answered a lot of your questions, but again, it's very common for people to reach out to us with additional follow-up questions. So feel free to give us a call, a chat, an email, what have you. Yeah, so have a good night, everybody, and good luck this fall.